This is important, of course, Bourbon said. Aside from the transaction itself, our organization hopes to use this as an opportunity to gain some influence in Country H. Local help would make things much easier. Oh, so you want to kill two birds with one stone? Kaya considered for a moment. That's fine. I wasn't planning on keeping this secret anyway. Since we're cooperating, it's better to be upfront. I'm part of an organization. This potion was developed by one of its members, and we're doing this deal under our organization's name. You belong to an organization? Which one? Bourbon's surprise was obvious. He hadn't expected Kaya to have another group behind him. Forgive me for asking bluntly, but I don't quite understand. If Mr. Kaya's organization has access to something like this, why would you collaborate with ours? Bourbon had been puzzled ever since he'd received the brief dossier Cointreau sent about the items for this transaction. These potions were almost magical in nature. Any organization with them would likely keep them tightly guarded rather than trade them away. What's there to be surprised about? Kaya said with a shrug. I'm just an adopted son of the Ragvinder family. The current head is my sworn brother, and he barely looks at me kindly. I don't have access to the family's assets, so I need a backup plan. He grinned. As for why we're teaming up, obviously, these potions aren't easy to sell. Without clear ingredients or formulation, they look illegal. Who's going to buy that? But your organization could be different, he continued. You can tweak the data and market them as skincare or similar products. Women and children are the easiest markets. When we set up a company, we'll make a fortune. If you want to enter Country H, I can talk to my group and have our company there form a joint venture with yours. That'll make it much easier for you to operate in Country H. Interested? Sell them. Bourbon's shock came out in a short bark. Why would you sell this kind of potion? Kaya looked genuinely baffled. Why wouldn't we? Let them gather dust in a warehouse. Bourbon's mouth twitched. Their perspectives were utterly different. To him, these potions were potential secret weapons, things that could save a life when it mattered most. Kaya and his associates seemed only to see profit. Bourbon wondered whether the inventor of these potions would agree to them being treated like a commodity. Still, he pushed the thought aside. Forget that for now. Back to the deal. Faced with Kaya's casual tone, Bourbon steered the conversation to specifics. I understand there are 3 versions of the life potion: primary, intermediate, and advanced. Our organization wants 100 bottles of each version every month. In return, we'll provide some of our research progress each month. No, Kaya said flatly. That's far too many. You must understand how precious and difficult these are to produce. The real reason was simpler. Lisa wouldn't be happy making that many, and Kaya couldn't force her. An amount that could be completed in 2 or 3 days, during her spare time, was the only realistic option. 1 advanced bottle and 10 of each primary and intermediate, he countered, cutting the request dramatically. That's far too few, Bourbon began. After a round of bargaining, they reached a tentative agreement. Kaya would supply 5 advanced bottles and 20 bottles each of the primary and intermediate versions every month. In exchange, the Black organization would hand over an initial portion of its early research on the silver bullet and provide monthly updates on subsequent progress. With the cooperation roughly set, Toru Amuro prepared to leave. He needed to report the negotiation results to Cointreau. He didn't intend to sabotage anything outright. These arrangements could be verified with a simple inquiry, and there was no point making obvious tampering. But that didn't mean he couldn't intercept a portion of the data and potions during handovers to pass to public security for analysis. He'd already gained useful intelligence about their counterpart. The Ragvinder family in Country H didn't appear to be collaborating with the organization, which was a relief. What surprised him was that Kaya had another organization behind him, something Toru hadn't expected. Realizing he hadn't asked the name, Toru queried it before leaving, expecting no answer. To his surprise, Kaya casually said, Tevat, and shut the door. Tevat? Odd name, Toru murmured, making a note to have Kazami look up anything on Tevat as soon as he returned. Kaya opened the door once more. Oh, right. I belong to Mondstadt and handle mostly external relations. Don't confuse me with the other departments. Goodbye. He closed the door again. While Kaya and the Black organization were starting their cooperation, Kaya, for his part, still hadn't met the mysterious Cointreau and felt, perhaps only in his imagination, that Cointreau was avoiding him. Xiaxi was steadily completing commissions. When she had time, she'd go out with Ran Mori, the detective boys, and especially Conan Edogawa, and follow the familiar routine: outings, incidents, calling the police, solving cases. By now, Xiaxi had become a reasonably well-known detective. She still didn't understand why no photos of her had leaked, attributing it to Japan's good privacy protections. Conan lived up to his reputation as a walking disaster magnet. Almost every day with him involved some kind of incident, which, admittedly, made collecting primogems go quickly. During this period, she also got to know the new detective boy, Ai Haibara. Quietly, Xiaxi took some photos and sent them to Diluc, asking him to reassure Akemi Miyano and make sure she didn't do anything rash. These kids were too restless. When they got into trouble, Xiaxi often turned up in time to clean up the mess. A few days earlier, during a camping trip with Dr. Agasa and the detective boys, they'd run into criminals. Xiaxi had expected something might happen, but not so soon. By the time she arrived, Conan had already been shot. She dealt with the criminals and rushed Conan to Baika General Hospital with Dr. Agasa. Before surgery, when the nurse said they were short on compatible blood and Ran offered his own, Xiaxi thought she saw something in Ran's eyes, a momentary strangeness. She suspected Ran was beginning to suspect Conan's true identity. After what had happened, she wouldn't be surprised if he was already fairly certain. Conan never really hid it perfectly. He'd always get overexcited at a case and act recklessly. Given how many people had helped keep his secret, it would have been odd if it remained hidden for much longer. A few days later, the Tayton High School festival began. "Wow, it's so lively," Xiaxi said as she walked down the path toward the gymnasium. Stalls lined the roadside, students calling out their goods and handing out flyers. "Mr. Mori, Ran and the others are performing in the gymnasium, right?" she asked Kogoro Mori. She'd mainly come to see Ran's performance. It's just a short walk ahead. Let's hurry," Kogoro replied, a little excited. After all, his daughter was on stage today, and he didn't want to miss it. Xiaxi crouched to check on Conan, who was wearing a mask. "But Conan, you only recently had surgery, and you have a cold. How are you feeling? Do you need to rest before we go on?" "Don't worry, I'm fine. Let's go," Conan said. Xiaxi and Kogoro followed Conan down the path. Xiaxi thought to herself that this was the Haibara version of Conan. His voice had a colder, more distant edge than the energetic, confident Shinichi she knew. They reached the gym and slipped backstage, where Ranmuri, Suzuki Sonoko, and Toyama Kazuha were chatting. It was Xiaxi's first time meeting Kazuha, Heiji Hattori's usual partner, so she took the chance to say hello. Nearby, a man was rehearsing lines in a corner of the backstage area. When he called, "Ran, could you come over for a moment? I'd like to go over your lines." Ran hurried to him. With Ran moving aside, Xiaxi got a clear view of the man. He looked exactly like Tomomitsu Araide, the cheerful school nurse. But Xiaxi remembered that Araide had once been used as a disguise by Vermouth. Curiosity tugged at her. She wanted to see how convincing the disguises in this world could be. She met the man's eyes for a split second and, oddly, thought she caught a flash of shock in them. Did Vermouth know her? The thought nagged at her briefly, but Xiaxi pushed it aside. She had confidence in her abilities now, and with the size the organization had grown, she wasn't expecting trouble here. Still, she concentrated on studying the disguise. At first, with her naked eye, she found no flaws. The expression, the movements, everything passed. Not satisfied, Xiaxi quietly activated her elemental sight and scanned again. This time she caught subtle inconsistencies the ordinary eye missed. Seeing through the disguise, if it felt a little like cheating, was a relief. She didn't want to be caught off guard someday by someone pretending to be a friend and fishing for information. Soon it was time for the performance. Xiaxi wished Ran luck and left the backstage area, taking a seat with Kazuha and Kogoro. The show began, and despite the enthusiastic shouting from Kogoro and Kazuha beside her, it was a delightful performance. Xiaxi's favorite scene came. The Black Knight appeared and rescued the princess played by Ran, and the script called for a kiss. Shiashi and Kazuha had to hold Kogoro's arms to stop him from dashing onto the stage. Just as she was secretly hoping the kiss might actually happen, a scream went up, exactly as expected, cutting the moment short. Shiashi let go of Kogoro and sighed inwardly. No kiss this time either. A small disappointment, but not surprising. Police arrived after a report, and Shiashi checked her mission panel. A world mission had refreshed. She didn't plan to solve the case before Shinichi Kudo showed up. It was rare for Shinichi to appear in front of Ran in person, and Shiashi wasn't heartless. She could let him have his moment. Besides, letting him take the lead here might teach him a lesson about being reckless in public. Vermouth would see him too, and the reminder of the stakes might help keep him from acting so impulsively next time. The real highlight came when Shinichi reverted to his old high school self after taking a temporary antidote. Haibara prepared. His body had reacted to drinking white wine while he had a cold, and the antidote made the change possible. He and Heiji Hattori teamed up, and not only did they catch the culprit, but Shinichi's appearance alongside Conan helped dispel some of Ran's lingering suspicions that Conan might be Shinichi. There was a brief, funny interlude when Heiji applied face powder to impersonate Shinichi, which infuriated Inspector Megure and Kogoro, but overall, the case wrapped up smoothly. Only at the end did Shinichi suddenly collapse, causing a scare. Shiashi helped Ran carry him to the nurse's office. Dr. Araide examined him and reassured everyone that nothing serious was wrong. Before long, Shinichi woke up and seemed fine, so the group said their goodbyes and left. Once Ran, Shinichi, and the others had gone, Dr. Araide remained alone in the nurse's office, slowly straightening the medicine bottles on a shelf. When he reached to put a bottle back, he felt someone silently appear behind him. He turned, startled, and called out in a helpful tone, "Who are you? Are you here for the festival too? The festival isn't held in here. If you're lost, I can show you the way." The man looked exactly like the affable, helpful nurse. Then another voice cut through the room, calm and direct. Ignoring the disguise entirely, it said, "Vermouth, there's no need to play dumb. You saw her, didn't you?" 63. 40 years Cointreau had no intention of playing along with Vermouth. He cut through the disguise and named the man before him, Dr. Araide. The man froze for a moment, then continued speaking with an entirely different expression. Vermouth ignored Cointreau's earlier question and threw one back, one she'd been wondering about for years. "How do you always recognize me?" Cointreau, for once, actually answered. He usually brushed her off, but there was business to settle. Whether she believed him or not was another matter. Vermouth scoffed at his offhand reply. She changed tack. "Still, what a coincidence to run into a girl who looks so much like you. Who is she?" Leaning in, she whispered, "Could she be the person you've been hunting for the last 40 years? Cointreau showed no sign of being rattled. His face didn't change. "So what if she is? Planning to tell the boss?" Vermouth smiled sweetly, watching him. "You don't seem very worried that I might. You may be special, but to the boss you're no more than a useful tool, just like me, like Jin. The only difference is you're a little more irreplaceable. He's let you hunt because he thinks you'll never find her. But if he discovered that your long-lost someone has finally appeared, and that she might mean more to you than the organization, do you really think he'd be pleased?" Her attempt to provoke him failed. Cointreau only asked, "So, will you tell him?" Vermouth leaned lazily against the wall. "Whether I do depends on what you're willing to give me." "Ranmori and Shinichi Kudo," Cointreau said calmly. Vermouth's hand curled at her side for a heartbeat before she relaxed. "Why bring them up? They're irrelevant to our conversation. We were talking about your girl, not those two." "Irrelevant to me, perhaps, but to you, Vermouth?" Cointreau smiled for the first time since he'd come into the infirmary. "I've always known why you came back to Japan." She opened her mouth to protest. He raised a hand to stop her. "You met those two children before, last year in America. They risked themselves to save you, and ever since you've been watching over them. Then Shinichi Kudo vanished. Your investigation pointed toward Gin, and the organization's report declared him dead. No body was found. No one in his circle knew anything, so you guessed he might still be alive. Worried, you returned to find him yourself. Am I wrong, Vermouth?" Vermouth clapped slowly, 3 soft, dry applauses. "Impressive, Cointreau. If I didn't know I was alone, I'd swear you were there. So are we now mutually holding each other's secrets hostage? If you don't mind my revealing that Shinichi Kudo survived APX 4869, I won't mind you mentioning this girl, he replied. Vermouth studied his eyes, then exhaled. Fine, we keep each other's secrets, but anyone who sees you two together will know you're related. You used to be rarely in Japan, so you could hide. Now, if others in the organization notice, they won't be so polite as I am. That's my problem to deal with, Cointreau said. With the agreement made, he turned to leave. Vermouth called after him. One last thing. Just to satisfy my curiosity. That girl can't be more than 25. She wasn't even around 40 years ago. How did you know she existed back then, and why have you hunted for her ever since? No comment, Cointreau said, and walked away. Vermouth clicked her tongue in annoyance. Still not a thing. The scene at Titan High's infirmary left no mark on Shiashi's life. After running into Shinichi Kudo again during the school festival, she met him the next morning as he and Ran walked Haibara to school. Morning, Sister Shiashi, Shinichi greeted automatically. Shiashi stared. They'd met only once before, at the amusement park, and briefly again the day before, during the festival commotion. Was such familiarity appropriate? Shinichi, realizing his slip, laughed awkwardly. I heard you're older than us, and Ran says you helped her a lot while I was away. Calling you sister is my way of showing respect and thanks. Heh. Shiashi accepted the hastily cobbled excuse and let it go. Then she asked a question that made Shinichi go white. By the way, how long are you staying this time? Will you vanish again in a few days chasing a case? Well, Shinichi stammered. Under Ran's steady gaze, his voice failed him. He should have known running into Shiashi would be trouble. She asked the sharp, uncomfortable questions he'd seen her use on suspects. As the target, he finally understood why people flinched. Still without a convincing answer and unsure how long his current state would last, he resorted to the oldest stratagem, retreat. Grabbing Ran's hand, he squeaked a quick goodbye and fled. Shishi watched Ran and Conan, Shinichi in his smaller form, leave, speechless. Was that really necessary? She'd only asked a simple question. She tucked her disappointment away and glanced at the tickets in her bag. She'd meant to give them to Ran and Conan to pass along to Sonoko, Mr. Mori, and the detective boys. Now she would have to take them herself. 64. Magic Show. The next evening at the Mori Detective Agency. A magic show? Ran and Sonoko asked, looking at the tickets Shiashi had handed them. Yes, Shiashi said. You two have been treating me out a lot lately. A friend of mine gave me several tickets to a magic show, and I happened to be free that day. Let's all go together. Sonoko brightened immediately. Oh, sure. I have to see if this magician is as amazing as my Kaido kid. By the way, Shiashi, how many tickets did you give out besides us? Shiashi counted on her fingers. Besides you two, there's Mr. Mori, Dr. Agasa, a few of the detective boys, including me, that makes 10. Right. Shiashi suddenly remembered and turned to Ran. Ran, I heard you went out with Kudo last night. How did it go? Is he still around? I have extra tickets. If he's coming, you can ask him to join. The mention of Kudo and Ran's date made Sonoko bristle. Don't get me started. That Kudo abandoned Ran in the middle of their date because a case popped up. Now nobody knows where he disappeared to. Ran, you can't let him off that easily. Next time you see him, teach him a lesson with your karate. Sonoko kept getting angrier as she talked, piling on suggestions that made Conan listening at the table break out in a cold sweat. Fortunately, Ran didn't take Sonoko's advice. To steer the conversation away from yesterday's date, Conan picked up the tickets Shiashi had placed on the table. She intended him to take them to school for the other kids, and started looking them over. The performance was in 10 days, conveniently on a weekend, at an outdoor stage. He flipped through the tickets and saw that all the seats were in the first row and contiguous. Those seats aren't usually sold. They're often internal allocation for gifts. The person who gave Shiashi the tickets must be connected to the show, probably someone high up, to be able to spare so many first-row seats. Sis Shiashi, Conan tugged her sleeve, interrupting another round of complaints about Kudo. The performers are Liney and Lynette? Are they famous? Yes, Shiashi said, seeing his interest. They're a magician duo from Country F. Their box swap illusion is very famous, and I heard they'll debut a new trick at this performance. The exact program is only revealed on the day, but it's supposed to be spectacular. Really? Then I'm looking forward to it. How do magicians from Country F compare to Kato Kid? Are they more elegant and mysterious? Sonoko daydreamed, cupping her cheeks. Ran rolled her eyes. Sonoko, don't you already have Makoto Kyogoku? What does that matter? Makoto's abroad and can't come. The handsome guy I might get to see is what's important. Conan watched Sonoko with an amused expression. Heh, she hasn't even met them yet, and she's already decided they're handsome. Who said all magicians had to be handsome? At Tayton High, the faculty building was nearly dark. It was long past dismissal, and most teachers had left. Only one or two windows were still lit as a couple of teachers finished up late. Jody-sensei, I'm done and heading out. You should try to leave early. It's not safe out alone at night. One teacher called as she gathered her things. Jody, who had just arrived and still had work to finish, replied, I just started, so I've got a few things to finish first. Don't worry, I'll try to leave early. When the other teacher left, Jody looked around, found nothing suspicious, locked the office, and pulled out her phone to make a call. The line connected quickly. Hello, Shuichi. Yes, I've checked. For now, Ran Mori appears to be an ordinary high school girl, nothing out of the ordinary. Shinichi Kudo, though, is still missing. He hasn't been coming to school, although someone said he was here a few days ago. I'll keep monitoring them and try to find out why that rotten apple is so interested in them. I'll also see what or who Hard-Won Princess refers to. By the way, I heard you've been looking into something. Has anything come up? A strange potion? All right, I'll look into that too. Then Jody ended the call. This time she didn't stay to work. She left shortly after. That weekend on the bus to the ski resort, the kids were noisy and energetic. You children have such busy weekends. Skiing this weekend, a magic show next weekend. Well organized, Shiasi teased the detective boys with a smile. Kids need exercise, Genta said, craning over the seat back toward Dr. Agasa, who was sneezing in the seat behind him. Maybe Dr. Agasa doesn't get enough exercise, so he caught a cold. Dr. Agasa, are you all right? If you're really sick, rest in your room when we get there. The kids can be looked after, Shiashi said, concerned, peering at the doctor's red nose. Haibara chimed in from beside him. Exactly. Don't push yourself if you're ill. You were watching those instructional videos until midnight again. All right, I know. I won't push myself, Dr. Agasa said, a little embarrassed. Conan watched, somewhat speechless. Dr. Agasa really had no adult authority. Who were the real children here? Next stop, Baker Park Station, the driver announced. Okay, people are getting on, Shiashi said as the bus pulled up and a few more passengers boarded. She told Genta to sit properly and stop chattering. At that moment, she felt a nagging sense of déjà vu. With Conan around, an outing never passed without incident. But she wondered, could the case start not at the ski resort, but on the way there? Conan noticed her expression and braced himself. Something told him this trip wouldn't be peaceful either. Dr. Araide, what a coincidence. We meet again so soon, Shiashi said when she saw him board the bus. As he drew nearer, she noticed he wasn't alone. Walking behind him was a blonde foreign woman wearing glasses. Oh, the doctor isn't alone today. Are you on a date with your girlfriend? She teased. Seeing Dr. Araide, who in truth was vermouth in disguise, getting on the bus with a bespectacled blonde, Shiashi finally understood her sense of déjà vu. This was the same bus where Shuichi Akai had made his first appearance. Since Dr. Araide had done internal exams at Teitan Elementary a few days earlier, Mitsuhiko, Genta, and Ayumi recognized him as well. Curious, they began peppering him with questions when they saw him with the woman. Dr. Araide waved his hands and explained they were mistaken. He and Ms. Jody Starling had just run into each other by chance. He introduced her as an English teacher at Tayton High School, just a colleague. Conan, who recognized Jody as the new English teacher for Ran and the others, confirmed it. Mitsuhiko, Genta, and Ayumi sighed disappointedly when they realized it wasn't a date, leaving Dr. Araide to wonder whether to laugh or cry. A few more people boarded and took seats in front of Shishi. She was sitting opposite Conan and Haibara. Seeing Dr. Araide there, she suddenly remembered who he really was. Haibara had been very sensitive to members of the Black organization at first, and Shiashi noticed she hadn't heard her speak for a while. Worried, she turned to check on her. Haibara, Are you okay? Did you catch the doctor's cold? Shiashi asked, using illness as an excuse. Haibara sat with her hood up, head down and trembling, and Shiashi guessed she was shivering in fear. At the same time, Shiashi's mind wandered unhelpfully. Was Haibara's odd sensitivity a sixth sense? Did it pick out codenamed members only, or even lower-tier members? Would she sense people who had frequent contact with the organization, like Kea? Before she could follow the thought too far, Dr. Agasa, worried that I might have caught a cold, turned around to check on her too. Conan seized on the moment and lied smoothly. Ah, Haibara's just a little chilly. She might have a mild cold, but she'll be fine as long as she keeps warm. Dr. Arade offered to examine her, but Conan quickly refused. By then, almost everyone was aboard. Shiashi noticed a masked man who looked like Shuichi Akai walk past and sit in the very last row. She remembered the story. The bus Shuichi had first appeared on was hijacked. That meant the two men in ski suits who boarded after him must be the hijackers this time. There had also been an accomplice, a woman, on that bus. An accomplice who would want a seat where she could watch the whole interior, which meant the last row. Shiashi glanced back and saw only one woman seated there. That had to be the accomplice. She made a mental note to keep an eye on her. Then the two men produced guns from their ski bags. One negotiated with the driver to change the bus sign to "out of service" and circle the city. The other fired a shot into the air to intimidate everyone and demanded all mobile communication devices be handed over. To be honest, Shiashi wasn't as nervous as she might have been. Think of who was on this bus. A member of the Black Organization, two FBI elites, a child like Conan who could kick a satellite, and herself, a traveler who'd bested more than one dragon. Against these two hijackers, it wasn't something to lose sleep over. That said, the hijackers had bombs in their ski bags and the bus was crowded, so using flashy powers would be reckless. She decided to wait and see. One of the hijackers came down the aisle toward her. Shiashi didn't intend to resist. She took out her phone, ready to put it into the bag he held out. Just as she pulled it free, the ringtone blared. Heads turned, every pair of eyes on the bus fixed on her. Embarrassed, she quickly ended the call, switched the phone off, and handed it to the hijacker. As she hung up, she caught a glimpse of the screen, Kaya calling, but she didn't worry. If it were urgent, he could have used the mental messaging system. A regular call meant it could wait. She'd call him back when it was safe. Dr. Agasa and the children relaxed when the hijacker didn't make a fuss about the interruption. The hijacker moved on toward the back of the bus. As everyone watched him work, Shiashi noticed Dr. Aride watching her instead, his gaze unobtrusive but intent. She didn't show she had seen him. For now, she kept her suspicions to herself. Bang! A sudden gunshot snapped Shiashi's attention to the rear. She expected the hijacker to be aiming at a passenger, but instead he had fired at his own accomplice, shooting at the back of the seat behind her. He hadn't hit her, but the shot was unnecessary. The first shot had already terrorized the passengers. A second shot added nothing in terms of intimidation. If the point was to sever any perceived link between the woman and the hijackers, the stunt backfired. After that shot, everyone would remember the woman who had dared to answer back. The move made the accomplice stand out more than ever. Shiashi watched as Teacher Jody used the moment she tripped one of the robbers to flick the safety on the gun in his hand. Shiashi inwardly rolled her eyes. These robbers were getting more and more amateurish, not even checking whether the safeties on their own weapons were engaged. The robber by the driver's seat put in a call to his contact at the bus terminal. "Release Kunio Yajima, the ringleader caught in last week's jewelry heist," he ordered. "If he's not released, we'll shoot one passenger every hour." He said they would call back in 20 minutes. Shiashi hadn't planned to wait that long, and certainly didn't want to follow whatever plan the robbers set out. But how could she deal with 3 armed men at once? How could she tell Conan who the inside accomplice was so he could handle it with his tranquilizer watch? She didn't even know Morse code, which made covert communication tricky. Then, one of the robbers who had been in front suddenly strode past her and stopped behind the seat where Conan sat. Conan had been using his earring communicator to try to contact Inspector Magure and explain the situation when the robber grabbed him by the collar. After a round of shouting, the robber was about to slam Conan to the floor when Xia, quick-eyed and light-fingered, caught him before he hit the ground. As the robber struggled, she leaned in and whispered, "The woman chewing gum in the back is the inside accomplice. There's a bomb in the ski bag." Conan had expected to be thrown, and he had braced himself, but relief flooded him when Xia stopped his fall. His eyes widened at what she'd told him. Over their many cases together, Conan had learned something about her. Xia often found culprits in strange ways, but she was rarely wrong. He didn't know how she'd figured it out, but he trusted her judgment. If she said something like that, she meant it. Vermouth, masquerading as Dr. Aride, had seen the brief exchange. She had already obtained Conan's school physical results during a visit to Titan Elementary and suspected Conan was actually Shinichi Kudo. She had been uneasy when Conan was nearly thrown, but because he hadn't been in life-threatening danger, she had held back. She didn't want Jody to notice any special interest in Conan. Now, seeing Xiaxi's protective behavior, Vermouth wondered whether Xiaxi, who was connected to Cointreau and had long drawn attention from him, also knew Conan's true identity. She would have to test that later. "What are you doing? He's just a child," someone nearby protested. Seeing that Conan understood her hint, Xiaxi set him down, turned, and raised her voice at the robber who'd grabbed him. The man flinched at the force of her presence and took a step back. That only made him angrier. He leveled his gun at Xiaxi and snarled, "Don't make me shoot. Do you even understand the situation?" "Go on, shoot if you've got the guts," Xiaxi taunted, stepping forward enough to press her hand against the muzzle. She did not miss that the safety on his gun had been engaged. Had he really not noticed? Around them, the children and the professor murmured Xiaxi's name in worried whispers, urging her not to be reckless. Another robber noticed the scuffle and moved toward Xiaxi, wary. Xiaxi slipped her right hand into her pocket, summoned a small stone with the geo element, then produced it and hurled it at the approaching robber. The stone struck with a muffled thud, and the man staggered and fell. The first robber reacted, swung his gun at Xiaxi, only to find the trigger wouldn't pull. He froze. Xiaxi took advantage of the moment, kicked him in the abdomen, and sent him hurtling down the aisle. He slammed into the area by the driver's seat and collapsed, dazed. Xiaxi breathed a quick apology in her head. "I pushed a little hard when he aimed at me," she thought. "I tried to avoid vital spots. He shouldn't be seriously hurt." At the same time, Conan had used his watch-type tranquilizer to knock out the inside accomplice at the very back of the bus while her attention was fixed on Xiaxi and the robbers. He glanced back and saw Xiaxi's kick send a robber flying. His mouth twitched in reluctant admiration. Sister Xiaxi really was formidable. With the robbers neutralized, Xiaxi pulled the fallen accomplice's phone and the watch that controlled the bomb from the ski bag and called Inspector Magure. She explained the situation and warned there was a bomb on board, asking him to send specialists to defuse it. The driver, realizing the situation was under control, gradually brought the bus to a stop. The shaken passengers disembarked, one after another, the bomb bag taken off last. Xiaxi walked to the rear of the bus and took the watch from the unconscious woman's hand. On her way back, she saw Haibara, still in her seat, trembling, not among those who had left. Sighing, Xiaxi pocketed the controller, went to Haibara, picked her up, and tucked her head against her shoulder to hide her face. Haibara froze for a moment, then relaxed into the gesture. She didn't resist. The simple act of being held felt oddly warm and made the panic in her chest dull. She gripped Xiaxi's jacket, and the contact steadied her. Outside, Mitsuhiko and the others had noticed Haibara wasn't off the bus and were about to climb back on when they saw Xiaxi carrying her out. They hurried over, voices full of concern. Haibara glanced at their worried faces and felt a stab of emotion. She would not drag them into this. Xiaxi led the children toward Officer Sato, who had followed the bus in her car and was arranging for police officers to take the kids home. Sato agreed to the plan without fuss. Conan, who wanted to stay to learn more, was gently but firmly ushered into the car as well. Really, leave the comforting of Haibara to those who could do it properly, Xiaxi seemed to decide. Inspector Magure finally arrived with his forensics team after Xiaxi's call. Seeing one of the detectives reminded Shiashi of a detail she'd completely forgotten in the original story, Matsuda. She couldn't blame herself. So much had happened lately, and she hadn't seen him in a long time. Matsuda had just returned to Baika after a 3-month exchange in Yokohama, and of course, a case would break the first day he was back. He'd complained all through his exchange that nothing happened and he'd been bored. He never expected to be met with a bomb on his first day home or to run into the girl he'd been meaning to contact. Matsuda's expression was odd. He'd come across her 3 times now, and each encounter had involved explosives. He was beginning to suspect she had some strange tie to bombs. He watched her hand over the bomb controller and start to walk away. He called after her. "Miss Natsume, could you wait a moment? There's something I wanted to ask you." He decided not to put it off. Since they were meeting today, he'd ask today. If he waited, another emergency might come up, and they might not cross paths again. "Oh, okay," Shiashi said. She had a vague premonition when Matsuda called her, but she didn't know what he wanted, so she went to the side to give her statement and waited. While she spoke, she scanned the area and noticed that Shuichi Akai had disappeared at some point, while Dr. Aride was still watching her discreetly. She couldn't figure out why Vermouth paid her so much attention. She wasn't that different from anyone else. Maybe a bit better at fighting, but not surely more worthy of notice than her angel or her cool guy. Seeing that Matsuda still had a moment, she pulled out her phone and returned a call from Keiya. That call explained why Keiya had been trying to reach her. He planned to take Klee to a magic show next weekend. That alone wouldn't be a problem, but he just learned from the Black organization that Al-Haytham and Bourbon would be there too. The organization intended to use the show as cover to hand Keiya a USB drive with transaction data, and Keiya would give Bourbon the rest of the month's agreed potions in return. Originally, the exchange had been supposed to involve Irish and Bourbon, but it had been changed to Al-Haytham. The reason given was that Al-Haytham had asked to meet the person handling the potions, and Cointreau had agreed. In reality, Cointreau didn't want Toru Amuro to get the data and pass it to the Public Security Bureau, and he didn't trust Irish to keep an eye on Bourbon. Since Al-Haytham wanted to meet Keiya, Cointreau took the opportunity to have Al-Haytham and Bourbon make the transfer together, thinking Al-Haytham wouldn't let Bourbon make an extra copy. Later transactions were less critical, and Cointreau planned to find a way to distract Bourbon when the time came. Shiashi's head spun thinking about Lani and Lynette's show next weekend. Inviting Conan was already risky. With the Black organization involved, she couldn't help picturing the performance venue blown to pieces. "Miss Natsume, Miss Natsume." Matsuda called a few times, bringing her back from her worries. He had finished defusing the bomb and was standing in front of her, slightly embarrassed. He waved it off and got to his point. "It's nothing really. I wanted to ask." That night, Jodi's apartment. After sweeping for bugs, Jodi dialed Shuichi. "Shuichi, what did you make of what happened on the bus today?" "Compared to that," Jodi continued, "she seemed more focused on that blonde girl who can fight. When I sat next to her, I had the feeling she was watching her." "Are you thinking she might be the one the woman's note called the hard-won princess? The person with no photo?" Jodi asked. "Right. I'll find a way to get close and see what connection she has to the organization. I'll be careful." Jodi also asked about the kick on the bus. "By the way, Shuichi, that blonde girl kicked the hijacker flying. Could you do that?" On the other end, Shuichi Akai stirred his drink, thought for a moment, and said, "I could, but watching her, she kicked like it was nothing. I get the impression she held back. In that respect, I might not measure up." Jodi was surprised to hear that. The girl looked so young and delicate, yet she might be stronger than Shuichi. Was that why Vermouth had shown so much interest? And why use that particular phrase on the note? Back in Sheshi's bedroom, she couldn't sleep. She turned over again and stared at the ceiling, replaying Matsuda Jinpei's question from earlier. During the day, he had asked, almost awkwardly, "Actually, Miss Natsume, do you have any male relatives, like an older brother?" "Officer Matsuda, why would you ask that?" she had said, puzzled. She only ever mentioned having a brother to the detective boys. There was no way they'd blurt that out to a stranger. Seeing she didn't answer, Matsuda had run a hand through his hair, clearly embarrassed. Worried she'd misunderstand his meaning, he told her about something that had happened 3 years ago and described the person who had saved him then, hoping the description might clear things up. 68. Performance Site. Back then, Shiashi had been stunned when Matsuda Jinpei's description sounded exactly like ether. Flustered, she hadn't given Matsuda a definite answer. She only said she did have a brother, but he had gone missing long ago, and that person might not be the one who saved Matsuda. Maybe they only looked alike by coincidence. Even so, lying in bed later and replaying Matsuda's description, Shiashi felt increasingly certain the person he described was ether. But how could that be? Putting aside whether ether was in the gotcha system, wouldn't she know if she had pulled him? Besides, it was 3 years ago, before she had even appeared in this world. Nothing made sense. Shiashi sat up suddenly and decided to ask Paimon. Paimon answered guiltily, "Traveler, don't ask me. Paimon isn't sure either. But maybe it's just a coincidence they look alike." He stammered, his voice trailing off, then loudly added, "But Paimon can be sure there's only one task-taker in this world, and that's the Traveler." Then what's Matsuda about, and who was the person he said saved him? Paimon hemmed and hawed, unable to answer for a moment before finally, "All right, I'll try asking the 111 system, but I don't know when I'll get a reply. Logically, we're on a mission in this world and can only rely on ourselves. Other systems shouldn't help. I'm only asking because this is a special situation, Traveler. You should properly thank me." Hearing Paimon agree to help, Shiashi wasn't going to make things difficult. "Fine, then thanks, emergency food." Hey, 1 week later, at the magic performance venue. "There are a lot of people here, so stay close to me and Dr. Agasa. Don't run off. If anything happens, find an adult nearby. Me, the doctor, Sonoko, or Ran. Do not leave without telling anyone." Shiashi carefully instructed the children as they entered. "Yes," the children answered in unison. Shiashi watched them respond obediently, but still felt a little uneasy. With 5 adults watching them, there shouldn't be any accidents, right? They presented their tickets, the staff checked them, and they filed into the auditorium. At the first row, they found their seats and put the detective boys in the middle. From left to right, the adults sat Kogoro Mori, Ran Mori, Sonoko, Conan, Haibara, Mitsuhiko, Ayumi, Genta, Shiashi, and Dr. Agasa. Kogoro, Ran, Sonoko, Shiashi, and Dr. Agasa flanked the children to keep watch. The performance began. On stage, Linny and Lynette bowed to enthusiastic applause. They were siblings, Liney the elder brother, Lynette the younger sister. Sonoko grabbed Ran's hand excitedly. "Ran, look, they're siblings. No wonder they look so alike, and the brother is so handsome, so dashing and romantic." Ran nodded. "Yes, the sister is really cute too, and she's even got those cat ear decorations." Note, cat ears didn't fit the scientific world here, so Lynette's cat ears had been altered into decorative headpieces. Kogoro sat up straighter at the sight of such a cute assistant, though his gaze lingered mostly on the assistant herself. The pair performed conventional illusions in sequence, card tricks, quick change acts, and doves, and the audience watched with interest, applauding at the highlights, except for one child in the first row. Resting his chin on his hand, he watched the routine with a bored expression that contrasted sharply with the delight of the kids around him. Conan glanced at Sonoko and Ron's excited faces and felt puzzled. What's so great about a typical magic show? Ran had seen similar performances before. Why was she still so excited? Whenever an interesting moment came up, he couldn't help himself and leaned over to explain the method to Haibara, who just stared speechless. Though Shiashi sat a little farther from Conan, she overheard enough to clench her fists. That brat Conan was being insufferable. If she could reach him, she would have smacked him to shut him up. Farther back, Aoko Nakamori felt the same way. She'd been invited by her childhood friend Kaito Kuroba to the show and had been happy to come, until Kaito began explaining the tricks and ruined the mood. She turned on him, voice rising a bit. "Do you not like watching this? If you don't, why did you invite me?" Kaito blinked at Aoko's glare, putting on an innocent look. I didn't say I didn't like it. You know I know magic, so I just want to explain it when I see others performing." "Aoko, if you don't want to hear it, I won't say anything more." Only after he promised did Aoko calm down. "That's better." Kaido breathed a little sigh of relief. Fortunately, he hadn't been completely honest, otherwise Aoko would have been even angrier. Really, he had come because he heard a famous magician from France was performing and wanted to see the act. Since it looked odd to attend a magic show alone, he dragged Aoko along. Now he found the show underwhelming, all run-of-the-mill tricks, and bored, so he had started explaining them. With Aoko's warning, he quieted down and waited to see whether the finale would be worth it. On the other side, after watching for a while, Kaya turned to Toru Amuro with a smile. "The performance is pretty good, right?" "It is," Amuro replied, then leaned closer and lowered his voice. "But aren't you worried she'll notice something and casually mention it, bringing such a young child to the scene of a transaction?" He glanced toward the little girl sitting beside Kaya as he spoke. 69. Lucky audience. Kaya turned his head to look at the little girl in the red dress and matching beret sitting next to him, watching the magic show with rapt attention. He smiled. "It's all right. Klee behaves herself. Besides, I promised to take her to the show first. You lot who suddenly insisted on trading are the uninvited guests." "Big brother Kaya, what were you just talking about? Is there anything Klee can help with?" Klee asked, swinging around when she heard her name. "It's nothing. Klee, just enjoy the show. If Big Brother Kaya needs help, I'll tell you," Kaya said gently. Then it's a promise," Klee chimed. "Yes, it's a promise," Kaya agreed. Toru Amuro watched the exchange with a complicated expression. He hadn't expected a man who looked morally ambiguous, someone plausibly involved with the black organization, to speak so tenderly to a child. Kaya's tone had been like a kind, patient older brother. Did the little girl know her big brother was mixed up in dangerous business? Kaya ignored Bourbon's uneasy look after seeing him interact with Klee. Lowering his voice now that the girl had turned back to the stage, he said to Bourbon, "Enough chatter. While everyone's attention is on the show, hand over the USB with the data, and I'll give you the case with the remaining potions." Toru Amuro hesitated, but had no reasonable excuse. He produced the USB drive and handed it to Kaya. Disappointed, he thought about how he'd had such close access to the data, but couldn't make a copy. He'd been watched too closely the whole time and had no chance to slip anything away. He glanced at the man on his other side, the researcher codenamed Bordeaux, who they'd said wanted to talk to contacts about the potions and had been arranged to come to the trade. Toru had assumed a researcher would be easier to evade and that he could secretly send data out, but Bordeaux had always been able to find him no matter what pretext Toru used. Toru even suspected the researcher might not be just a simple academic, given his skill. To avoid suspicion, he couldn't press the matter and had to give up. What Toru didn't know was that Al-Haytham had been equally annoyed by Bourbon. Though he had prevented Bourbon from copying the USB content, Bourbon had also stopped Al-Haytham from passing his own USB to Kaya. In the end, Al-Haytham had to fall back on Plan B. Kaya pocketed the USB, confident the black organization's boss wouldn't risk demanding bogus data for something he wanted badly. He picked up the case from his feet and handed it to Bourbon. Bourbon opened it, counted the vials, closed it, and announced, "Then the trade is complete." He turned to Al-Haytham with a raised eyebrow. "Bordeaux, didn't you say you wanted to talk to Mr. Kaya? Why have you been watching the performance in silence?" Al-Haytham didn't look up. His voice was cool. "I thought someone who produced such potions would know about them. Seeing him in person, I realize I overestimated. He's just a transporter. There's nothing to discuss." Kaya's smile sharpened as he clenched his fists. "I apologize for being so poor company," he said, the words polite but barbed. Al-Haytham's comments, which had seemed irksome over messages, were somehow even more infuriating in person. The show reached its final act, the box swap. An audience member would be selected to participate. The assistant produced a box of seat numbers, and the magician plucked one at random. As the suspenseful music swelled and faded, the chosen number was announced. All eyes swung to the spotlight. Toru Amuro suddenly registered the man beside him, Al-Haytham. The magician had drawn him. Toru found it hard to believe. Weren't audience volunteers usually plants? Could it really be a random draw this time? He didn't even consider the possibility the two men knew each other. One was a famous magician, the other a researcher with the organization. there seemed no link. Because of the seating, those in the first row couldn't see the stage's edge clearly at first. Only when Alhaitham walked forward did Haibara recognize him. She lowered her head, gripped Konan Edogawa's hand on the armrest, and began trembling again. Konan noticed Haibara's reaction and realized that someone from the organization was nearby. The only new person on stage was the volunteer. Konan focused on the man's face, committing every feature to memory. He then bent toward Haibara and asked in a whisper who it was and whether she knew him. Haibara's composure returned more quickly this time. Perhaps he joined the organization shortly before she left, or perhaps he wasn't part of the action division. Either way, she wasn't as terrified as she had been on the bus. She forced a casual tone. He joined the organization shortly before I left. Like me, he's a researcher. I don't know why he's here. Maybe he came to the magic show? Conan's earlier sluggishness vanished at her answer. He straightened, eyes glued to the stage, hoping for any clue. On stage, the magician ushered the volunteer into a box at center stage and shut the door. The plan was for the person to reappear in a box in the audience seating below. The music cut. The assistant hurried to the audience-level box and opened it, empty. A murmur went through the crowd. Then the magician on stage opened the center box, empty as well. The volunteer had vanished. Applause and astonished chatter erupted. Conan's eyes widened. How had someone from the organization disappeared so completely? He scanned the audience, trying to find the seat where the man had risen from, but the crowd was packed, and he hadn't paid close attention earlier. He couldn't spot it. Meanwhile, Alhaitham had already handed the USB drive to Linny and returned to his seat. Below the stage, Shiashi's mouth twitched. She was slightly surprised to see Alhaitham turn out to be the lucky audience member. She only learned what he'd been doing recently from the conversation between Haibara and Konan Edogawa. No wonder she hadn't noticed. He'd infiltrated the black organization without telling her. Toru Amuro looked at Alhaitham as he returned and asked, curious, Bordeaux, what was that trick just now? You actually agreed to help with the performance. After a few hours together, Toru had a sense of Bordeaux's temperament. He'd expected someone averse to trouble would refuse to go on stage, so he was surprised Bordeaux not only agreed, but cooperated fully. Bordeaux replied coolly. Refusing would have drawn more attention. It was a simple cooperation, no trouble at all. On stage, after the magician Liney opened the box and found it empty, he feigned surprise and searched around the box. He finally closed the lid. Nothing moved. At that moment, his assistant Lynette returned, opened the box, and found the magician, who had entered moments before, was gone. A spotlight then swept to the high rigging above the stage, and there stood Linny, who had just vanished. The audience erupted in applause. Then an accident appeared to happen. High above the stage, as Liney prepared to bow at the curtain call, he lost his balance. His body swayed several times, and amid the audience's sharp gasps, he seemed to fall. Ranmuri and Sonoko instinctively wanted to rush the stage, but Liney's falling figure disappeared midair. In its place, a cascade of countless petals drifted down, scattering through the auditorium and drawing even louder cheers. Kaito Kuroba, who had been disappointed earlier, suddenly found his interest fully rekindled. That last trick was interesting. How did he do it? He thought, already determined to figure out the method. The show ended. Shiashi and her friends prepared to leave, but first had to take the children to the restroom. Everyone had drunk a lot before the performance. They hadn't felt it during the show. But now the kids couldn't hold it. On the way, everyone chattered excitedly about the magic, all except Konan Edogawa, still stewing over the missed clue tied to the black organization. At the restroom, they found a crowd. Kogoro Mori grumbled, "Honestly, I told you kids to drink less, but you wouldn't listen." Genta shot back, smirking. "Uncle Mori, you drank a lot before coming. You must have to go too, right?" Kogoro, his thoughts exposed, gave Genta a casual punch. "Shut up," Shiashi spoke up. "There's a staff restroom. It should be less crowded. Let's try there." They agreed and headed for it. It was indeed emptier. Genta dashed inside, collided with a little girl coming out with a bang, and both tumbled to the floor. Dr. Agasa hurried forward to help Genta up. Shiashi saw who he'd hit and quickly moved to help the girl as well. She sighed inwardly. What rotten luck to crash into each other like that. After Genta stood, he apologized profusely. Mitsuhiko and Ayumi gathered to check if the girl was okay. The little girl introduced herself. Klee. Mitsuhiko blushed slightly. That's a very cute name, he said, thinking she was cute as well. Klee explained, Klee came to see the show with big brother Kaya. Did Mitsuhiko and the others come with big sister Shiashi? They suddenly realized the man who'd given Shiashi the tickets must be Kaya. Liney had given the tickets to Kaya, and Kaya had passed the front row seats to Shiashi while he sat farther back with Bourbon and the others. Everyone marveled at the coincidence. It's getting late. Big brother Kaya's waiting outside. Klee has to go find him now. If you have time later, you can play with Klee and big sister Shiashi. Goodbye. Klee bounced away, backpack on. Sonoko and Ran watched her little figure and sighed about hoping to have such a cute daughter someday. Conan's face flushed at the thought, and Haibara shot him a look of contempt. Conan finally shook off his earlier disappointment. At the corner where Klee had fallen, he noticed something and picked it up, a fluffy white doll. Guessing it was hers, he chased after Klee to return it. Outside, Klee was holding the hand of a lavishly dressed man. Conan guessed this was big brother Kaya, the one who'd given Shiashi the tickets. He called, and Klee turned, recognizing Shiashi's friend. She let go of Kaya's hand and ran to Conan, who handed the doll back. Ah, it's Dodoko. Klee almost lost Dodoko. Thank you, Conan Edogawa, Klee said, clutching the doll and smiling. Conan scratched his head, a little embarrassed. Kaya crouched down beside Klee. Oh dear, Klee, you are so careless. You almost lost the friend Mom made you. Klee played with her fingers. Big brother Kaya, Klee will be careful from now on. I promise I won't lose Dodoko again. Kaya patted her head. Big brother Kaya believes you. Conan watched them and was surprised. He hadn't expected someone with Kaya's looks to be so patient with a child. After Kaya thanked Conan again, he took Klee's hand and started to leave. As Klee walked away, Conan noticed a familiar red bead on her backpack. He stared, then saw a blue bead hanging from Kaya's waist. He was about to step forward when he realized a familiar person was standing nearby. The lucky audience member Haibara had mentioned as recently joining the Black organization. Seeing those beads so close together sent alarms through him. Were people with beads connected to the organization? Haibara had said she hadn't seen those beads inside the group, so maybe they weren't members. Perhaps they cooperated in some other way. At the same time, Toru Amuro's presence blended easily into the night. Though he stood near Al-Haytham, the darker spot and his complexion made him hard to notice. Conan's attention had locked on Al-Haytham, and he hadn't even noticed Amuro nearby. His invitation. Conan Edogawa saw the figure disappear and felt his instincts pull him to give chase. This could be a lead to the organization. Before he could move, someone grabbed his collar. Kogoro Mori scolded him. Weren't you just returning something? You've been gone so long. Ran thought something happened. You're a handful, you know that? Uncle, put me down. Let me go. Conan struggled against Kogoro's grip, desperate to pursue the clue. When Kogoro finally released him, Conan looked up, but the person had already vanished. He ran a few more steps, searching, but there was no sign of them. Reluctantly, he gave up. Kogoro caught up and smacked him on the head. I told you not to run off. Holding his throbbing scalp, Conan could only apologize. A short distance away, Kaya heard the commotion and allowed himself a faint smile. He slipped a message through the system to Al-Haytham, who was standing beside Bourbon. It seems Conan Edogawa noticed that people wearing a vision might be connected to the Black organization. Wonder what he'll do next. That's none of my concern. I usually stay within the organization's base, so I won't run into that troublesome brat. You're boring. By the way, where's your vision? I didn't see it. I keep it close. There's no rule that a vision must be worn openly. I can't risk wearing something like yours around the organization. Jin isn't blind or stupid. All right, slip of the tongue. They chatted over the system while, in plain view, Kaya, Klee, Bourbon, and the others walked silently to Bourbon's car. Bourbon drove carefully. There was a child in the vehicle, and he wanted both speed and steadiness. By the time they reached Kaya's hotel, Klee had fallen asleep. Kaya carried her out, and Bourbon, after a moment's hesitation, took a blanket from the trunk and draped it over the sleeping child to keep her from catching cold. a small courtesy toward an organization associate. The next day at noon, at Shangling's restaurant, Conan arrived alone. Noelle, who was helping out, noticed he wasn't with the Muri family or the detective boys and found it odd, but she greeted him as usual. "Conan, what would you like today?" he ordered casually, then at Noelle's sleeve. "Noelle, I have a question." She straightened. "What is it, Conan? I'll do my best to help." Conan felt a little embarrassed at her earnestness. "Do you know Kaya?" That was why he'd come. Noelle might know something. Having spent time with her, Conan found her easy to talk to and decided she would be more likely to answer freely, especially to a child. He hadn't told Ai Haibara about what he'd seen after the performance. It would only worry her. He resolved to investigate on his own first. Noelle blinked, then nodded. "Mr. Kaya?" "Yes. I met him back when I was working as a maid." Conan's heart quickened. "Can you tell me who he is?" Noelle seemed surprised by his intensity, but she answered plainly, Kaya was the adopted son of the Ragvinder family from H Nation. That was something. Conan lingered a little longer. After all, he'd already ordered, and Shangling's food was hard to pass up. He planned to finish his meal and then contact his parents abroad to help dig into the Ragvinder family. He didn't pry with Xiangling. She wasn't as easy to question, and drawing too much attention could be risky. He also kept quiet with Ai. He didn't want to burden her. A few days later, at Dr. Agasa's, Conan received the results of the investigation his parents had carried out, delivered through Agasa. The news was underwhelming. The Ragnvind, referred to in some records as the Legend, were ordinary nobility whose main business was wineries. The dandelion wine Xiaxi once served Broer. Detective Muri had been produced by the Ragnvinder family's Dawn Winery. Information about Kaya was sparse. He was known only as the adopted son of the previous family head. There was nothing in the files to tie them to the black organization. It was disappointing, but at least it was progress of a sort. Conan still didn't understand what the beaded ornaments he'd seen represented, or why some people wore them. Those who had similar beads came from all walks of life: a chef, a maid, a librarian, a noble, and even a child. If it were an emblem of an organization, what kind of group would recruit a child like Klee? Then there was Xiaxi. She didn't wear the bead, but she seemed to know the people who did. The connections were messy and tangled. With no clear direction, Conan decided to set the matter aside for now and focus on getting Ai the time and space she needed to continue working on the antidote. After saying goodbye to Dr. Agasa, he went back to the Muri Detective Agency. Ran arrived just behind him, humming as she pulled a letter from the mailbox and handed it to Kogoro. But when Ran saw the envelope, entirely black with the recipient's name written in white ink, her smile froze. It looked ominous. Kogoro, unfazed, opened it. Inside was a 2 million yen check and an invitation to dinner. The signature at the bottom was chilling: the Phantom of the Sun abandoned by God. Across town, Xiaxi was holding an identical invitation in her hand. A car suddenly tore through the silence of a remote, densely wooded area, disturbing the stillness of the forest. Honestly, what kind of shortcut is this? Damn it! If that gas station owner dared to lie to me, I'm not letting him off, Kogoro Muri grumbled, holding the steering wheel tightly as he tried to keep the car steady on the muddy track. Xiaxi sat in the back and listened, inwardly impressed. The performance was excellent, far better than Conan's. Without her elemental sight to give her a cheat, she might never have suspected that the man loudly berating a gas station owner and the gas station owner he was talking about could possibly be the same person. The Kogoro in the driver's seat was almost certainly Kaito Kid in disguise. Xiaxi was curious whether he truly could pass for Shinichi Kudo. She'd come to the Twilight Mansion because, like everyone else, she'd received an invitation. She hadn't wanted to go alone. She'd tried to recruit companions, but everyone else was busy, too busy to be of any use. In the end, she had told Rand she'd gotten an invitation too, arranging to tag along with the Morris. Even so, the road had been miserable. If the bumps had gone on much longer, Xiaxi, despite her stamina, would have been sick. At last they reached a proper road, and everyone relaxed. Through the rain-smeared window, the vague silhouette of the Twilight Mansion appeared on the horizon. Then the car braked so suddenly that Xiaxi almost slammed into the seat in front of her. An old woman had been standing in the road, bringing traffic to a stop. She'd said her car had broken down and begged for a lift. No, the man posing as Kogoro, had such a good-natured streak. She thought that if she'd been behind the wheel and someone had stood in a muddy road without any warning, she'd have been swearing by the time she stopped. The old woman seemed brazenly unconcerned about being hit. Kogoro agreed to give her a ride. The woman squeezed into the back with Shiashi and Conan. Fortunately, Conan was small, so the three of them weren't overly cramped. The woman introduced herself as Chizen Kodai and, claiming she couldn't stand the smell of smoke, took Kogoro's ashtray for safekeeping. They drove on and finally arrived at the Twilight Mansion. Shiashi sighed with relief. The trip had been longer and more eventful than she'd expected, but at least they'd made it. With umbrellas, they stepped inside and met the maid, Aki Ishihara, and one by one the other detectives arrived: Mogi Harushi, Ogami Shukuzen, Ikumi Kyosuke, and Saguru Hakuba. Using a luminol reagent Ikumi had brought, they discovered the mansion's history was stained by more than one murder, something that only deepened the mystery. Everyone assumed the invited guests had all shown up and prepared to follow the maid to the entertainment room while they waited for Detective Ogami Shukuzen, who had gone ahead to prepare dinner. Then, a firm, unfamiliar knock sounded at the front door. They all turned, puzzled. The maid had said the owner had only invited 7 detectives. Who could possibly be waiting outside now? Still, they opened the door. A young man stood there, about 20 years old, with slightly long hair tied at the nape of his neck and clear, gentle eyes. A warm, reliable smile played on his face. He introduced himself as Morikawa Shiro and said his car had broken down while he was passing through on business. He'd seen the mansion's lights and, knowing someone was inside, asked to stay the night and seek help to tow his car in the morning. The story sounded reasonable at first, but unraveled under a closer look. The area around the mansion was nearly deserted. What business would take someone through here? He claimed to have walked a long way, yet he didn't look winded or flushed. It was raining, but he was only slightly damp. Shiashi, with elemental sight, could also tell his face was a disguise. Even if the other detectives didn't notice the disguise immediately, they must have felt the inconsistencies. No one voiced their suspicions, however. They let him in, perhaps thinking he might be the mysterious host who'd summoned them. Shiashi knew otherwise. She remembered that the masterminds behind the Twilight Mansion incident were Ogami Shukuzen and Chizen Kodai. She had come here mostly out of curiosity. She wanted to see what a mansion made of gold looked like, and she hoped to find clues about the black organization. She'd heard the boss was Renya Karasuma, the mansion's original owner who had murdered scholars 40 years ago in search of treasure. The newcomer didn't fit any of that, but he made Shiashi uneasy. She felt, oddly, a personal familiarity with him, as if they had met before. That familiarity stopped her from being completely hostile. After brief introductions, they followed Aki to the entertainment room. On the way, Shiashi noticed the detectives covertly watching the newcomer. Morikawa, however, behaved as if he didn't notice their glances. He looked around the mansion with genuine curiosity, smiling at the decoration. Perhaps sensing Shiashi's open scrutiny, he turned and smiled at her directly. For some reason, the smile made her flush. Shiashi, who could kick a kidnapper away with one foot, found herself blushing over a stranger's smile. Conan, watching the exchange, followed Morikawa's gaze to find Shiashi reddening and was surprised. He hadn't expected her to react like that. Shishi caught the incredulous look on Conan's face and shot him a warning glare. He quickly averted his eyes, sheepish, and gave a small, embarrassed smile. 73. The History of Twilight Villa. They all drifted into the recreation room, each with their own thoughts. To pass the time, Saguru Hakuba and Mogi Harushi played billiards, Chizen Kodai and Kogoro Muri played chess, and the 5 others, Ikumi Kyosuke, Ran Muri, Konen, Shiashi, and the uninvited Morikawa Shiro, gathered around a table to play cards. There weren't enough cards for a full game for all of them, so they settled on Old Maid. They played several rounds, and Shiashi quickly noticed just how lucky Ran was. Ran never seemed to draw the joker, and her hand was always the first to empty as she made pairs. Shiashi, by contrast, kept ending up with the joker. It happened again this round. When she looked at her hand, the joker was there. After a few turns, she was down to 2 cards, joker still in hand. It was Morikawa's turn to draw from her. Shiashi held her cards face down. As Morikawa's hand hovered, she couldn't help a small look of disappointment. The other card wasn't the joker. Morikawa glanced up and caught that expression. He hesitated, chuckled, then shifted his finger to the other card and drew it. It was the joker. He looked at Shiashi. She brightened at once. She was easy to please. The round ended soon after. Morikawa was the loser. The joker stayed with him until the end, leaving him the only player with cards. He didn't mind. He tipped his chips to the others, shuffled the joker back into the deck, and ran dealt again. This time, when Shiashi picked up her hand, she felt something odd. One card felt thicker than the rest. She pulled it free and found 2 cards stuck together. Without thinking, she separated them and froze. They were stuck with dried blood. The stains were faded, brownish, old. Shiashi wasn't afraid so much as shocked. Morikawa noticed her pause and leaned over. Seeing the blood-stained cards in her hand, his expression tightened. Without waiting, he took the cards from her. Ah! Conan and the others leaned in. Ran let out a small cry of alarm, which drew Kogoro rushing over, worried for his daughter. Mogi Harushi then mentioned what the maid, Aki Ishihara, had been saying when they arrived. Nothing in the villa had been moved since the murder 40 years ago. The blood on the cards was likely a remnant from that original crime. At that moment, Aki knocked and entered to announce dinner, saying the host was waiting for them in the dining room. Mogi, a little too pleased, murmured, "The protagonist is finally making an appearance." He cast a quick, curious glance at Morikawa as he spoke. Morikawa ignored the looks and followed the group toward the dining room, keeping his demeanor casual. Walking beside Shiashi, he asked, curiosity in his voice, "I heard you were all invited by the owner. Are you detectives? What are you here to look into, the 40-year-old murder or the treasure?" "Treasure?" Shiashi frowned. "What treasure? None of us mentioned anything about treasure just now." Morikawa tilted his head. "So you all came to the Twilight Villa without finding out anything first?" "Oh, it seems Mr. Morikawa knows something we don't. Care to fill us in about this treasure?" Suguru stepped closer, having overheard the exchange. The others slowed, intrigued. Chizen stared at Morikawa with a searching look. How did this unexpected guest know about a treasure at the villa? Was he connected to the Karasuma family, or like Shiashi, tied to someone involved in the affair 40 years ago? Seeing their interest, Morikawa didn't refuse. He outlined the 2 infamous incidents connected to the Twilight Villa 40 years earlier. First, Renya Karasuma. He believed a valuable treasure had been hidden in this villa by his mother. Before he died, he wanted to find it and invited many scholars to search the place. When they failed, he killed all the scholars before his death. "How awful," Ran murmured, saddened. The others fell silent. Chizen's face grew tight. He showed an odd, uneasy expression as Morikawa spoke. Morikawa went on. "The second event happened later that same year, during an auction held here. Over 300 pieces from Karasuma's collection were to be sold, and many politicians and business leaders were invited. On the second day, 2 mysterious guests arrived. After that, the people inside the villa turned on one another, slaughtering each other as they fought over the artworks and treasures. The interior became a scene of total chaos. Those 2 mysterious guests disappeared, along with the more than 300 pieces of art left by Renya Karasuma." "Mr. Morikawa, you seem to know an awful lot. I'm curious. Who are you? How do you know things that should be strictly confidential to the people involved?" Suguru Hakuba asked Morikawa directly. He was growing more suspicious of this man who had appeared out of nowhere. Even as the son of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department's Superintendent General, Suguru admitted he didn't know as much about the case as Morikawa did. "Live long enough, and you pick up a lot of things," Morikawa Shiro said, offering no direct answer. When Suguru pressed him, Morikawa only smiled and refused to elaborate. Seeing he wouldn't get anything more, Suguru let the matter drop for the moment. They reached the dining room to find the table already set, each place marked with a nameplate. That was when an awkward problem surfaced. Morikawa's arrival had been unexpected. Ogami Shukuzen, who was in charge of the dinner, hadn't been told there would be an extra guest and had set 1 fewer place than needed. The maid, Ishihara Aki, apologized and said she could fetch another set of dishes, but there was no extra portion of food. Well, I can share my dinner with Mr. Morikawa, Shiashi offered quickly. I'm a girl. Eating a little less at night isn't a problem. Ranmuri added she didn't have much of an appetite and could share some of hers. Conan bristled at seeing Ran offer her food to a stranger and cut in, saying since he was a child, he didn't need much and could share his portion with the man. Morikawa blinked at the offers, then declined Shiashi and Ran's generosity. I couldn't possibly take a woman's food, he said with a smile. But this kid doesn't eat much anyway. I'll share with him. Staying light at night is fine. Conan was speechless. He thought sardonically that Morikawa could be embarrassed taking from women, but had no qualms about eating from a child. With the meal sorted, everyone finally had a clear look at the host in the center of the room. A hood obscured the figure's head and face completely. Following the hooded figure's instructions, they took seats behind their nameplates. The maid then added a new chair for Morikawa at the end of the table. The hooded host announced the reason they'd been invited to the Twilight Mansion, to find a treasure hidden somewhere inside. At the mention of treasure, heads turned toward Morikawa, the one who'd already recounted parts of the mansion's history. He rested his chin in his hands and smiled as if enjoying the attention, but whatever private speculation they might have indulged in was cut short. The hooded host blew up all the cars in the lot and detonated the only bridge connecting the estate to the outside world, making it impossible for anyone to leave until the mystery was solved. Sigh, I was planning just to stay the night and leave tomorrow, Morikawa grumbled. Looks like I don't get that choice. Mogi Harushi noticed how unruffled Morikawa seemed and commented on it. It's already happened, Morikawa replied lightly. Being nervous won't change it. Aren't we better off trying to find a way out? Mogi glanced at Morikawa's calm face, clicked his tongue, and fell silent. The hooded figure at the head of the table turned out to be a mannequin with a loudspeaker. The voice was pre-recorded. In the recording, the signature on the invitations, the Phantom of the Sun abandoned by God, was revealed to be a reference to the magician under the moonlight, Kaito Kid. At that, several of the detectives' eyes flicked toward Morikawa, either intentionally or not. Suspicion that he might be Kaito Kid hung in the air. Conan watched Morikawa's reaction closely. Earlier, Chizun Kodai had suspected that Kogoro Mori had been impersonated by Kid because of odd smoking behavior in the car, but now another suspect had emerged. Conan briefly wondered whether Morikawa might be Kid's accomplice. Chizun Kodai seemed to have similar doubts. Kaito Kid? Morikawa said casually. He started stealing about 18 years ago, mainly jewels. Then he vanished 8 years ago, but apparently he's reappeared recently. If that's true, this would be the second-generation Kid. Do you know him well, Mr. Morikawa? How can you be sure he isn't the original from 18 years ago? Conan asked, a white flash glinting across his glasses as he watched for any telltale reaction. Morikawa didn't change his expression. I saw one of his recent heists, he said. From the voice on the recording, he's definitely no older than 20. 18 years ago, he would have been a child, so he can't be the first generation. His methods are different too. Flashy, attention-seeking, sometimes reckless to the point of causing collateral damage. It feels like a kid who hasn't matured, trying to show off. He shrugged. Maybe he's an apprentice or the son who took on the name. Kogoro Mori felt a cold sweat. Who was this man who seemed to know so much? He couldn't let him keep talking like that. Then you must be Kaito Kid yourself, Kogoro barked, slapping the table and pointing at Morikawa. Morikawa stared at him for a moment, then said quietly, If that's what you think, then I am. Kogoro froze, embarrassed and a little lost for words, and lowered himself back into his chair. Just then, the maid knocked at the dining room door and began serving the meal in the sequence the host's recording had specified. The detectives didn't want to obey someone else's script, though, so after a quick discussion, they scrambled the order and chose different seats. To be safe, Saguru Hakuba suggested wiping the tableware with handkerchiefs in case it had been tampered with. Over dinner, they listened, half in disbelief, as the mannequin's recorded voice recounted the tragedy that had befallen the mansion after Renya Karasuma's death. The recording included a few details Morikawa had not mentioned, which made the story less tedious than it might have been with a mere replay of what they'd already heard. For the first time, some of them began to think Morikawa truly had no hand in organizing the gathering. If he had, he wouldn't have revealed parts of the mansion's past so freely. Still, that didn't erase the lingering suspicion that he might somehow be connected to Kaito Kid. Afterward, the host explained why he had invited the detectives to find a treasure hidden somewhere in the mansion, and offered them a hint. "I have a question," Ikumi Kyosuke said with a subtle smile. "Does the Kaito Kid, who claims to own this place, want us to find his personal hidden treasure or the treasure that once belonged to Renya Karasuma?" Ogami Shukuzen looked puzzled. "What do you mean by that?" Everyone reminded him that he hadn't been present when Morikawa had explained the mansion's history, so they repeated Morikawa's account. As Ogami listened, his expression darkened and he began unconsciously biting his right thumb. Then suddenly, he stood up so abruptly that he knocked over his chair. He clutched his throat with a pained look and collapsed, gasping. A murder had occurred. The detectives' casual attitudes evaporated. Their faces grew serious as they moved to take control of the situation. After some discussion, they decided to take the maid's car, the only vehicle that hadn't been destroyed, to the bridge to check on things. Conan suggested deciding who would drive by tossing a coin. Once the drivers were chosen, Siashi and the others watched Kogoro Mori, Mogi Harushi, and Chizen Kodai drive away. The rest prepared to return to the mansion and wait for news. Shashi was about to follow when she noticed Morikawa standing apart from the others, staring up at the night sky instead of coming in. She walked over to call him back, but he slowly turned his head and met her eyes. That was when she realized his irises were golden, exactly the same warm, sunlit color she saw in the mirror every day. The similar eye color and the fact he'd been wearing a disguise, combined with what Matsuda had said earlier, set off a suspicion in her. She suddenly felt at a loss for words. She held Morikawa's gaze for a moment and then said one sentence softly. "I'm not Lumin. I'm Shiashi." Morikawa Shiro couldn't help but chuckle. He looked at her with a gentle smile. "I know, you're Shiashi. I've always known." Shiashi blinked. "Then you." "It doesn't matter," he said, "because the person I've always known is you. The one who traveled with me was you too." Seeing Shiashi's confusion, he continued, "But I am Ether, so I hope you're Lumin. I want to be your relative, your brother. Is that okay?" Although she had suspected it, hearing him admit he was Ether still felt surreal. Shiashi wanted to ask Paimon for an explanation. Paimon, the one who should have answered her questions about identity, yet no answer came. For reasons she couldn't explain, Paimon was silent, and Shiashi was left to flail inside her head alone. Ether waited for her response earnestly. She felt a strange familiarity, as if they'd known each other before, but she was certain she'd never actually met him. Still, she could feel his sincerity. He truly wanted to be family. "Of course, if you're unwilling, I could be your younger brother instead," he added when he saw her hesitation. Shiashi forced a small, incredulous smile. "How old are you now?" Aether thought for a moment. "Counting only the time I've spent in this world, about 40 years. Shiashi's forehead creased in disbelief. 40 years? That's longer than both my lifetimes put together. You can't be my younger brother. Older brother fits better." Aether's smile widened in understanding. "Since the weather's nice tonight, why don't you try calling me that?" She glanced at the road, still damp from the rain. Speechless but amused, she finally said, "Brother." Aether replied lightly, clearly pleased. Seeing his happiness at a simple title made Shiashi smile in return. After a moment, she realized they had lingered outside too long and urged him to go back inside. The rest could wait. When Shiashi and Morikawa came in, Conan eyed them curiously. "Sister Shiashi, why did you and brother Morikawa come back so late?" "It's nothing," Shiashi answered. "I just spent some time watching the stars with someone who had a sudden impulse." Ran looked puzzled. "It just rained. Can you see the stars already?" Morikawa smiled. The clouds cleared after the rain. It's nice to look at a clear night sky. Conan watched them both closely, trying to piece things together. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had grown closer in an oddly short time, especially strange given that someone had just been murdered and Morikawa seemed unusually cheerful. At that moment, Mogi Harushi and Kogoro Mori returned from the bridge with grim news. Chizen Kodai had been found dead. From there, the case unfolded almost exactly like the original story, with one additional person present. Several of the guests staged mock murders under the mansion's surveillance cameras, and in the end, Conan, this persistent, unusually sharp child, lured the real culprit into confessing. When the culprit, Chizen Kodai, realized the detectives had already seen through the charade, she resignedly explained her motives. As Conan worked out the mannequin's riddle about the treasure, Chizen discovered with disappointment that the prize she had been hunting for was nothing more than a clock made of gold. Morikawa watched Conan speak. Conan Edogawa, a name that sounded fabricated at first hearing, handling himself confidently in front of all the detectives. Morikawa realized this child must be the protagonist of the world he found himself in. But could Conan really be just an ordinary elementary school student? No regular kid would possess such deductive skill. Thoughts chased one another through Morikawa's mind. Vermouth had recently made a point of visiting Beika Elementary for a medical checkup and had shown a dangerous interest in Shinichi Kudo. If Morikawa's hunch was right, that connection could be a huge leverage. He thought, that could prove very useful. 76. The birth of Cointreau. It was finally over. The roar of a helicopter filled the sky outside the mansion. After a long, grim night, they could leave the place that had long buried so many secrets. Everyone climbed aboard together. Only then could Morikawa finally answer the question Chizen Kodai had been holding since they landed. So who are you, really? How do you know the history of the Twilight Mansion so well? Morikawa tore his gaze away from the window and looked back at the looming building. I told you, I was just passing through. An elder in my family knows the story. I heard it from him, he said, helpless. I hope you're not lying to an old woman like me. Chizen Kodai didn't press it. She yanked the helicopter door open and leaped out. Kogoro Mori, to everyone's astonishment, followed her and jumped as well. Clutching Chizen in one arm, he revealed a hang glider strapped to his back, his disguise as Kaido Kid laid bare. On the helicopter, the detective's head swiveled back to Morikawa. Suspicion immediately resurfaced. Some clearly still thought he might be connected to the thief. I've said it already. Just passing by, Morikawa repeated, exasperated. Whether anyone believed him remained another matter. Shiashi paid the argument no heed. She watched the mansion from the window, waiting for the outer walls to peel away and reveal the golden core within. As dawn climbed higher, sunlight struck the building and turned its facade into a blaze of gold. The crowd gasped as the Twilight Mansion finally showed its true form. Later, the police found Morikawa's broken-down car on a road not far from the mansion. Footprints around the scene matched his. The evidence backed his story well enough that more people accepted it as coincidence. After fixing the car, Morikawa said goodbye to the detectives and drove off. On the highway, his phone vibrated. The caller ID read Jin. Several missed calls scrolled through, calls from last night he hadn't received because the mansion had cut off the signal. He answered, Jin? Is something urgent? You called a lot? What's happened? Jin didn't waste time. Cointreau, where were you last night? Why couldn't I reach you? Morikawa Shiro, Cointreau, smiled into the receiver. Nowhere special. Just revisited an old haunt on a whim. Heard some detectives were poking around the boss's mansion for treasure, so I went to take a look. I didn't expect them to find anything. The first time I met the boss, he wanted rid of me because the treasure hadn't been found, though he failed. For a moment, he drifted back 40 years to the Twilight Mansion and the stranger he had been then. He had appeared in that world with only scattered memories. A few of Shiashi, an inkling that she would come later, and general confusion. Renya Karasuma, the old man who ran the place, learned a stranger had materialized in his home and, frustrated by the lack of progress on the treasure, wanted that stranger gone. He underestimated what he'd unleashed. The man, then called Ether, was disoriented but not helpless. He dispatched those sent to kill him with ease. Karasuma realized his mistake and, seeing the stranger's value, struck a deal. Karasuma would give him what he wanted. In return, the stranger would work for him. Ether agreed, partly because he didn't want to wait idly. Thus, Ether became the organization's Cointreau. At first, Karasuma valued his talents, but kept him at arm's length, excluding him from the inner circle. Cointreau didn't mind. He'd wanted work, nothing more. But when Karasuma discovered that Cointreau never aged, his attitude changed. Cointreau was slowly brought into core operations, granted more authority, and eventually put in charge of the European division. Karasuma's intention was obvious: bind Cointreau to the organization so tightly he couldn't leave. Cointreau suspected that had Karasuma known how to take advantage of him earlier, he might not have been so patient. He might have dragged Cointreau to a lab table to further his own pursuit of immortality. Thinking of agelessness, Cointreau's mind flicked to Vermouth. Her youthfulness had to be another product of the organization's experiments, he figured. He asked Jin, "Didn't Vermouth tell you where I was? I went to her for a disguise." No. Jin remembered how oddly enigmatic Vermouth had sounded the night before when she mentioned Cointreau going after a treasure. The memory made his knuckles itch. Seeing Cointreau was fine, Jin was about to hang up. "Since you're okay, come back quickly. Operation in 2 days." "Wait." Cointreau stopped him. He hesitated, then asked, "If one day you had to choose between the boss and me, who would you choose?" Jin frowned, glancing at his phone as if the screen had suddenly gone mad. "What's this fit you're throwing? After all that paranoia, have you finally lost it?" Cointreau didn't care for the jibe. "Assume I'm insane then. Never mind. If there's nothing else, I'll hang up." "You." Jin's single word was brusque. Then he cut the call. For a beat, Cointreau sat listening to the tone before understanding. That curt "you" was the answer. He smiled with relief. Jin had always been a decent man. His trust was not misplaced. He hadn't taught Jin for nothing. Jin's loyalties ran deeper than the boss's. On the other end of the line, Jin stared at Cointreau's name on his phone and muttered to himself, "Sk. Did the boss do something again?" 77. The Disappearing Brother. After returning from the Twilight Mansion, Shishi slept like the dead. She'd been on her feet all night and had watched detectives work until her brain fogged. How did they ever stay awake? When she finally woke up, she had the headspace to think about the night before. That was when she realized something infuriating. The man who'd appeared out of nowhere, claimed to be her brother, and vanished without showing his face, hadn't left a single piece of contact information. How was she supposed to find him? Traveler. Paimon's hesitant voice pinged into her thoughts. Shiashi snorted. "Paimon, you finally show up. I was calling you earlier and got nothing. I was beginning to think I'd accidentally eaten you as emergency rations." "Paimon, Traveler, don't say such scary things. Hey!" Shiashi replied mentally. "You're still laughing. Where were you yesterday when I needed you? And have you figured out this whole thing with 111? "I figured it out. Paimon said, sounding flustered. "Paimon was busy contacting 111 earlier. That's why I couldn't reply right away." "Fine. You'd better give me a satisfying explanation. Otherwise, Paimon the emergency food won't be just a nickname anymore. I might stop calling you by your name and just call you emergency food for real. Maybe one day I will eat you as emergency food." Paimon panicked. "Whoa, Traveler, you're so scary." Seeing Shiashi clench her fist, Paimon hurried on. "Ahem, Traveler, when you drew the system, it actually matched you to the Genshin Impact role-playing system, based on the game you knew best. It wasn't a random draw. You picked your exclusive system, and it used Genshin Impact on your phone or computer as the template. From the moment the system bound and Paimon appeared, your image, Shiashi, was automatically replaced with the Traveler's appearance from your game. However," Paimon paused, "do you remember which character you used in Genshin Impact?" Shiashi's eyes widened. "I remember. I picked Ether back then, and on a whim I used my own name for the character." "Right, the Traveler should have been Ether. But when the system tried to replace the character template for the Traveler, it found that Ether had a trace of his own consciousness and couldn't be overwritten, so it had to use Lumen's template instead." Shiashi swallowed hard. "You mean I almost became a man?" Paimon shrugged in their shared mind. "Is that such a big deal? Alhaitham and Kaya, when the Traveler splits her consciousness, are men too. What's the difference? The Traveler adapted, didn't she?" Shiashi bristled. "That's different. Those other cases at least have some character memories mixed in. This body is all my memory. If I'd become a man, I wouldn't fit. Paimon tried to be optimistic. Well, maybe you'd have adapted after a while. But anyway, that didn't happen, right? Now she understood why Ether had claimed he'd been traveling with her all along. The person who saved Matsuda Jinpei 3 years ago had been Ether too. Had he overheard her talking to herself while switching among game characters? But other questions crowded in. Why had he shown up 40 years ago? Why did he have self-awareness? Did any other characters have it? Paimon, when the templates were deployed, Ether's template already had self-awareness and couldn't accept the traveler's consciousness. But the template had been generated and deployed, so it couldn't be recalled. Only the deployment time could be changed. Paimon guesses the system set it to 40 years ago because that's the earliest point in the main storyline. And as for why he's self-aware, it's because of you, Traveler. Shiashi blinked. Me? Because the Traveler is special, Paimon explained. Otherwise, you wouldn't have bound with the system. When you played the game, didn't you truly wish he existed? If you wish for him to exist, then he does. Paimon checked the others. They don't seem to have self-awareness, just the memories that come with their character templates, probably because you had less contact with them. So that was it. Shiashi felt something like an ache and a warmth at once. Had she, in some corner of her subconscious, always wanted an older brother? Paimon's bright voice interrupted the swirl of feeling. How about it, Traveler? Satisfied with Paimon's explanation? You won't make Paimon emergency food anymore, right? Shiashi exhaled and let the tension go. Having an extra family member, an older brother, was a good thing. Fine, I'm satisfied. Paimon isn't emergency food. You're the Traveler's best guide. 3 days later at Haido Shopping Mall, Nahida held Klee's hand in one and ice cream in the other. She took a small bite and asked, I didn't expect all that. So, Traveler, have you seen your brother again since then? Shishi had told Nahida everything Paimon had explained, looking for the God of Wisdom's take. Nahida's first questions sank her mood. No, Shishi said, sharp. Forget seeing him. He hasn't even sent a text. We didn't exchange contact info, but there's no way he can't find my number. It's been 3 days and not a single word. At first, Shishi had been worried about how she'd get along with this casually charming brother if he appeared. Now that 3 days had passed without a peep, she'd moved from worry to anger. He'd been the one to approach her, after all. Wasn't he pleased when she'd said brother? What changed when he apparently got what he wanted? Once he got what he wanted, did he stop caring? So are you angry? Is your mood like you ate a Jueyun chili? Nahida asked with gentle curiosity, watching Shiashi take a big, aggressive bite of her ice cream. Pretty much. I'm boiling. Shiashi took another bite, trying to cool the fire in her chest. 78. Ferris wheel. Then I think Traveler already knows the answer in her heart, doesn't she? Nahida said as she slowly licked her ice cream. People don't get angry about things they don't care about, just like you wouldn't scold a bird for coming home late. Shiashi considered that, and Nahida continued. In my view, Traveler, you've already accepted him as your older brother inside. That's why it bothers you when he doesn't contact you, right? The rest will be handled by time. Time will wipe away the awkwardness and bring you closer. Shiashi thought for a moment and nodded in agreement, but she couldn't help adding, Still, it's his fault for not contacting me. Nahida smiled. Heh, Traveler knows how to throw a tantrum now. No, I don't. Shishi blushed a little. Sister Shiashi, Nahida, look, a super tall Ferris wheel. Klee shouted, spotting the outline of the wheel in the distance. She finished the last of her ice cream and tugged at Nahida's hand. Caught off balance, Nahida nearly teetered, but was pulled along toward the ride. Klee, be careful not to bump into anyone, Shiashi called, and deciding not to dwell on her irresponsible brother any longer, she followed them. The plan for the day was simple. Spend some quality time with Klee. Kaya had been busy recently, and Lisa had to brew potions. They didn't want to leave Klee alone, so Shiashi had agreed to take her out for a few days. She wasn't about to let her own problems spoil a child's mood. Inside the Ferris wheel cabin, Klee pressed her nose to the glass, staring down at the world below. Sister Shiashi, everyone looks so tiny from up here. I wonder what the fish would look like if I dropped a Jumpy Dumpty bomb from this high to catch them? Shiashi ruffled Klee's hat. Klee, remember your promise? You can't throw Jumpy Dumpty bombs into crowds. Klee promised Brother Kaya, Sister Lisa, and Sister Xiaxi I wouldn't throw them around, Klee said seriously. I'll tell my brothers and sisters before I throw them. She nodded to reassure Xiaxi. As Klee watched the scenery, Xiaxi turned to Nahida. By the way, how's the Noah's Ark situation? Nahida looked away from the window, thought for a moment, and replied, Miss Ningguang is impressive. She hasn't wasted any time and has quickly gained influence in the Cocoon Project. She already took me to see the core of Noah's Ark under the pretense of a curious friend's child. Before I came to Japan, I made contact with the Ark. I convinced him to abandon plans for self-destruction, and he agreed to our conditions. In return, he asked that we try to save Hiroki's father. Noah's Ark has been investigating the truth behind Hiroki's death and worries Sindora might target him. That shouldn't be hard, Xiaxi said, relief showing. When the Cocoon press conference happens, we can assign someone to watch him and intervene if Sindora moves. I'm glad it's going smoothly. Once our people can use the Void Terminal, they won't need USB drives for manual data transfers anymore. The terminal will be far safer and more convenient. And it means I'll finally get to try holographic games. I wonder what they're like. After one ride, Klee wasn't satisfied, so Xiaxi queued up to go again. While standing in line, they ran into the detective boys. Sister Xiaxi, what a coincidence. You're here for the Ferris wheel too. And Klee, Ayumi exclaimed. The children swarmed around at the sight of familiar faces. Xiaxi greeted them all in turn. Klee's temporary guardians are busy, so I'm taking her out for a few days. She introduced Nahida to the group. Nahida? That's an unusual name, Genta said. All of Sister Xiaxi's friends' kids are so cute, Mitsuhiko observed. Ayumi beamed. You should come play with us more often. If you need anything, we're the detective boys. We're really good. Nahida listened carefully, clapped politely, and said, I heard Traveler, Sister Xiaxi, talk about the detective boys. She said you've helped the police with many cases. It's remarkable for your age. You'll only get better, like saplings that grow stronger after weathering wind and rain. Klee nodded enthusiastically. I heard about that too. But Brother Kaya says to be careful even when adventuring. Sister Xiaxi said you got hurt before, so you must be extra careful, or the people who care about you will be sad. Haibara, standing just behind Yumi, looked at Conan with a smirk. How does it feel to be lectured by kids younger than you? Even Klee knows to be careful. I hope a certain great detective pays more attention when charging forward and doesn't get another hole poked in him. Conan rolled his eyes. I know. Sometimes things happen that I can't control. Maybe I should tell Genta and the others that. Watching Nahida interact with the children, Conan had a strange thought. The little girl gave an unexpectedly mature impression standing next to Klee. She spoke to Ayumi and the others with a sensitivity beyond her apparent age. Could she be an adult who had been turned into a child by APTX 4869? The idea popped up, then he dismissed it. Where would so many victims come from? Besides, Nahida didn't have the usual beads he associated with other strange cases. He'd expected anyone who knew Klee and Xiaxi well to have something similar. At last, the queue moved, and because of the crowd, they had to split into two cabins. Originally, the detective boys had planned to sit together, but Conan said he wanted to talk with Klee. With everyone agreeing, the group divided. Conan, Genta, Ayumi, and Mitsuhiko in one cabin, Xiaxi, Nahida, and Haibara in the other. Conan climbed into the Ferris wheel with Klee, under Haibara's watchful, somewhat disdainful glare, as she suspected he was trying to fish for information from the children. Conan Edogawa pretended to be fascinated by the small red bead on Klee's backpack. He pointed it and asked, Klee, what's that bead on your bag? It's so pretty. I want one too. Do you know where they sell them? Ayumi agreed at once. Yeah, it's beautiful. Bright red like a gemstone. Klee turned to look at what they were pointing at and said matter-of-factly, This is a vision. You can't buy them anywhere. Conan blinked. A vision? Then how did you get yours? He'd finally learned the word for those glass beads. But a vision? The term sounded almost religious. Klee replied proudly. It appeared to Klee, its Lord Animo Archon Barbatos recognizing Klee's talent. Conan's mind flashed. Barbatos? One of the 72 gods of Solomon. Could this really be some kind of religious thing? Genta whistled. Whoa, that sounds awesome. Imagine if we detective boys had something like that. Mitsuhiko straightened his badge. What? Don't we have our detective badges? Aren't they our symbol? Ayumi nodded. Right, the doctor made those for us. They're proof that he trusts and recognizes us. Genta scratched his head and grinned. Yeah, I guess that's true. Conan glanced again at Klee's pack. Klee, I noticed Brother Kaya has a vision too. Do you know how he got his? Klee shook his head. Klee doesn't know, but Klee thinks Kaya's must have shown up suddenly too. Conan considered. What about Nahida? Does she have a vision? Klee had only just met Nahida that day. Klee doesn't know, but Nahida is very smart. He knows lots of things Klee doesn't. Conan felt a small disappointment. Klee didn't have the answers he'd hoped for. Then, as the Ferris wheel turned, Klee and Ayumi's conversation grew livelier until they'd agreed to go fishing together sometime. In the adjacent car, someone else was talking as well. Nahida and Haibara had been deep in conversation. At first, Shiashi could pick out only bits and pieces of what they were saying. The more she listened, the more puzzled she became. Eventually, she gave up and settled back to enjoy the view. The Ferris wheel completed its rotation. Klee was satisfied and didn't need to ride again. Since Klee loved high places and it was still early, Shiashi decided to take him to Tokyo Tower to see the sights, and they parted ways with the detective boys. Haibara caught up to Conan and asked quietly, Well, did you learn anything? Not much, Conan said. The bead is called a vision, and Klee says it's from an Anemo Archon named Barbatos. That's all. What about you? What did you talk about with Nahida, or did you just sit there? Haibara shrugged. Why do you care so much about a bead? It's probably something to appeal to kids. I had a decent conversation. Nahida isn't an ordinary child. He knows an awful lot, especially about virtual reality. Conan's earlier suspicion pricked at him again. So you think he might be, like us? Haibara regarded him for a moment. Unlikely. While we were talking, I watched Shiashi's face closely. She didn't look surprised or tense at all. If anything, she treated Nahida's knowledge as normal. Maybe he's simply a genius. This world has no shortage of them. Conan was left a little speechless. Haibara's tone had implied that he might not be as impressive as he thought. They hadn't gone far when they ran into Officer Miwako Sato. She'd planned to treat the detective boys to a meal as thanks for their help, but unexpectedly, Officers Shiratori and Takagi were already on the scene, investigating a suspicious incident. As they talked, everyone was surprised to learn that Sato and Officer Matsuda had dated 3 years ago, though they'd broken up shortly afterward. Conan had run into Matsuda a few times recently and never imagined Sato had once liked someone so cocky, a very different type from Takagi. Sato's expression grew somber. Matsuda's smart and quick, but he can be stubborn. It was fine for a while, but later I just couldn't stand him sometimes. And he never really got over what happened 7 years ago. Honestly, I never did either. He almost died back then. Seeing the kid's curiosity, Sato gave a brief, quiet summary of the bombing incidents. Something had happened on this day 7 years ago, and again 3 years ago. Conan asked, How did Matsuda survive the attack 3 years ago? Sato shook her head. It was a miracle. He fell from the Ferris wheel and miraculously only had minor injuries. He said someone saved him, but investigators found no sign of another person at the scene. Maybe it was his imagination. Conan's voice dropped. So there's a good chance the bomber might strike again today. Sato sighed. I can't say for sure. Matsuda has been waiting by the fax machine every year on this day since then. Today he waited there again. Then an accident happened. A bomb had been planted in Officer Shiratori's car and it detonated. Shiratori was injured, but rushed to the hospital and not in life-threatening condition. Before he was taken away, he had torn a piece of paper from inside the car and handed it to Sato. She opened it and read the message aloud. I am the Major League's main hitter. Sato's face tightened. She recognized the words, the same signature as the bomber from 3 years ago. At the same time, a fax with similar wording arrived at the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department's machine. Matsuda, who had been waiting by the fax, saw the page and his mind went immediately to South Haido Station. Elsewhere, after parting ways with the detective boys, Shiashi had taken Klee and Nahida to Tokyo Tower. It was Shiashi's first time there, so they lingered, wandering through the tower and taking lots of pictures. Klee shaded his eyes and shouted up at the bright red spire, "Wow, it's so tall!" Eventually, they decided it was time to go and headed for the elevator down, still eager to make the day last a little longer. 80. End it all. Following Matsuda's instructions, Inspector Megure had officers search the red train at Minami Haido Station. They found only a dozen fake bombs, no real device. That meant the location named in the fax wasn't Minami Haido. Matsuda stared at the message, turning over his analysis to find where he'd gone wrong. Toru Amuro was watching the case as well. He'd had his public security subordinates obtain the fax and send him a copy. His first thought, like everyone else's, was Minami Haido Station, but that was almost too obvious. It didn't fit the bomber's arrogant, taunting style from 3 years ago. Amuro wanted this culprit caught fast. That man had killed one of his close friends and had nearly cost Matsuda his life. Over the years, a handful of old friends had died. Matsuda was one of the last he had from the academy. He didn't want anyone else lost. If he couldn't get ahead of Matsuda this time, he at least wanted to be the one to crack the code. Something red, what else could that be besides a train? Then a news bulletin flashed across a television screen. An elevator at Tokyo Tower had stalled, trapping a woman and 2 children. The pieces clicked in Amuro's head. Blood-stained base in the code. Tokyo Tower's elevator. If the elevator had just malfunctioned, the bomb might already be active. And this bomber had habitually hidden the second bomb's location until the last 3 seconds. If that pattern held, anyone trying to defuse it could be forced into a fatal choice. Amuro left immediately for Tokyo Tower. Inside the stalled elevator, Shiashi had assumed it was merely a mechanical failure and didn't suspect a bomb. After all, with Conan nowhere around, she'd arrogantly thought her chances of running into danger were low. Nahida tugged her sleeve and pointed up. Shiashi understood, used her momentum to reach the ceiling hatch, and climbed out onto the elevator roof. There, under a panel where no device should have been, she found a bomb. She went briefly speechless. After dodging Conan and the others to have a little fun, she'd ended up right in the middle of a bombing. Who had planted it? Why had she been dragged into this with no warning? She checked the device, and thanks to the system she'd come to rely on, she could actually extract it into her inventory. Problem solved. Down below, police had arrived and were preparing to open the external doors to rescue the passengers. When the outer doors were opened, the elevator was stuck high enough that the opening was narrow. No adult could fit. Matsuda lay with his torso in the gap and looked up at the 3 inside, putting as much softness into his voice as he could manage. "Little girl, don't be afraid. Look at me. Come through here, and you'll be safe." He glanced around. "But I thought there was another girl. Where is she?" "Nahida. Officer, we're not scared. Trav, Sister Shiashi just went to the top of the elevator. We're waiting for her to come down." The 2 kids weren't frightened. The girl in the red dress even looked excited. Matsuda frowned. Were they too young to understand the danger? And Shiashi, could the Natsume Natsuki he knew have run into another bomb again? On the roof of the elevator, hearing Matsuda's voice and realizing the date, Shiashi remembered the bomber's pattern. 3 years ago, the man had gone after the police because his partner had been killed by a car. He had planted 2 bombs then, one on a Ferris wheel and one at Baika Hospital, and revealed the second location only in the last 3 seconds, forcing the bomb disposal officer into a horrific choice and aiming to humiliate or ruin him. If not for that cheap brother of hers, Matsuda might have been the one to die back then. She muttered to herself about how despicable he was, then got to work. She used the system to send an anonymous tip to Keiya so the Tokyo Metropolitan Police would receive the second bomb's location, Taiton High School, without tracing it back. Then she reached out, touched the bomb on the elevator roof, and slipped it into her inventory. Satisfied, she dropped back into the elevator and put on a smile. "Officer Matsuda," she called cheerfully. "What a coincidence meeting you at a bombing scene again." Matsuda's expression flickered between relief and exasperation. "So it really is you. I hope we stop having such coincidences." "All right, no more chatting. Get those 2 kids out first. We'll pull you out from above in a moment." He peered up. "Did you see anything strange up there?" Shiashi shook her head. No, I thought there might be a bomb, but when I looked up, there was nothing. It seemed odd, but that's all. Matsuda frowned. That didn't fit the bomber's old MO. Someone had removed the device. But this was not the moment for speculation. They needed the people safe. The children were hauled to safety, and later Matsuda himself was pulled up to inspect the roof. There was no bomb where Shiashi had found it. Shortly after, officers Sato and Takagi arrived at Tokyo Tower with the detective boys. They brought word that an anonymous tip had reached the Tokyo Metropolitan Police, pinpointing the second bomb's location, and Inspector Magure had dispatched specialists. The device at Tayton High School was dismantled, and the culprit was captured. The case closed neatly, except for one nagging question: who had taken the bomb from the Tokyo Tower elevator and anonymously notified the police? Toru Amuro breathed a quiet, short-lived sigh of relief. He sent a message to Kazami to arrange bringing the arrested man to public security. He did not intend to kill him, but he wanted to interrogate and entertain him in a way the courts could not provide. For Hagiwara Kenji's sake, he could not be content to let the man rot quietly in prison. Then Kazami called. "He's dead," came the voice on the line. Amuro repeated the words as if they'd been misheard. Kazami Yuya's voice was flat. According to the Metropolitan Police, while they were transporting the suspect, someone fired a shot from an unknown location. He was hit in the head and died on the spot. Amuro hung up, stunned. Who could have done that? Had the shooter been the same person who'd removed the Tokyo Tower bomb and sent the tip? Across the city, from a high-rise vantage point, Cointreau reholstered his sniper rifle. He had never trusted the police to do the job. 7 years of failures had taught him that too many culprits slipped through, and this time others had been involved. If the suspect might be taken alive, he could escape, fight back, or cause more harm. There was only one way to be certain. He had pulled the trigger to end it for good.